Okay, I have a confession to make. I've never really been that interested in visiting Hawaii. Now, that may be a weird thing to say since Hawaii is at the top of so many people's travel bucket lists. So why wasn't it at the top of mine? Well, it's because the people who I knew who raved the most about Hawaii there's no delicate way to put this, had the strongest colonizer vibes. So in my mind, if they loved Hawaii, then Hawaii must be... Well, my family and I recently got back from an almost 2-week trip to Oahu, and what I realized is I was totally wrong about Hawaii. Welcome back to Top Flight Family. My name is Carmen Sognonvi. When we started planning this trip to Oahu, one of our biggest challenges was figuring out how to comply with the very strict travel restrictions that Hawaii has in place. We've been to several countries already in the past year that require COVID tests to enter, so we're used to that. But Hawaii has much more specific requirements than most when it comes to when and where to get tested, as well as the type of test you need to take. If you want all those details, I'll link below to the video we made about that. Now, some people may think that the restrictions Hawaii has put in place are overkill. After all, it's part of the United States, right? Why should they make it so onerous for fellow US citizens to visit? Well, Hawaii actually has very good reasons to be this cautious. Ever since the first European ship arrived in the islands in 1778, with Captain James Cook at the helm, Hawaii has dealt with a never-ending string of infectious diseases brought by foreigners. Some of the biggest outbreaks included cholera in 1804, influenza in the 1820s, mumps in 1839, measles and whooping cough in 1848 and 1849, and smallpox in 1853. It's estimated that in 1778, when Captain Cook first arrived, Hawaii had a population of about 800,000. By 1890, the native population was down to just 40,000. That's a 90% reduction in just a few generations. So yeah, I definitely can't blame the Hawaiian government for exercising a little extra caution during a global pandemic. For the last year, there's been little to no tourism in Hawaii due to COVID. Of course, that's been really tough on those who work in the hospitality and tourism industry within Hawaii. But on the other hand, this year has been maybe the first time in modern history that locals in Hawaii have had their islands to themselves. Before, they wouldn't bother visiting their favorite beaches because they knew they'd never be able to find a parking spot because of the hordes of tourists. But suddenly now, those beaches were practically empty. Before, they'd given up hope of landing a reservation at popular restaurants because they were always packed with tourists. But suddenly now, tables were readily available. Did the absence of tourists hurt Hawaii's economy? Of course. But it also caused many Hawaiian locals to ask the question, do we really want things to go back to the way they were before? When it comes to Hawaii's reopening for tourism, locals have mixed feelings, to say the least. One of the biggest areas of concern is whether or not tourists will comply with local COVID-19 safety protocols, like social distancing and wearing masks both indoors and outdoors. And based on some of the comments that we got on our video about Hawaii's travel restrictions, I have to say that those fears are not unfounded.
Did the ocean breeze pacify you? Did the palm trees sanctify you? I bet the ocean breeze did advise you that you'll never find you on the run from yourself, on the run from yourself.
We stayed at 3 different resorts during this trip, and the first one was Four Seasons Oahu, located in Ko'olina on the west side of Oahu. If you're interested in learning more about this property, I'll link below to our in-depth review. It rained quite a bit during our time here, but Oahu looks so beautiful in the rain that I wasn't even mad. Plus, after each rainfall, we got to enjoy incredible double rainbows like this. One of the most memorable experiences we had during our stay at the Four Seasons was going sailing with Hawaiian Ocean Adventures, which is a native Hawaiian-owned and operated company. We sailed on this traditional Hawaiian outrigger canoe. Not only did we see manta rays and dolphins frolicking in the waters, but we got to see the mountain where the people of Oahu believed the demigod Maui was born. You probably know Maui from the Disney movie Moana, but what you may not realize is that he's a real figure in Hawaiian mythology. The girls and I had recently done a unit on mythology in our homeschool, so we really enjoyed listening to our guides telling the myth of how Maui restrained the sun. In this story, Maui's mother complained to him that the kapa cloth she made couldn't dry fully because the sun was always setting too quickly. So Maui snared the sun's rays with a lasso made of his sister's hair. The sun pleaded for its life, and it agreed to slow down its pace so that the days would be long in the summer and short in the winter. The canoe we sailed on had some modern updates, like an engine. But besides that, it's actually very similar to the types of vessels that the ancient Polynesians used to explore the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. It's believed that the Polynesian people originated from what is now Taiwan and Southeast Asia. They were able to explore the Pacific Ocean, and they settled many of the islands there. If you consider that the Pacific Ocean makes up 64 million square miles, and that it's greater than all the land masses on Earth combined, that's a pretty incredible feat. Early European explorers were baffled by how the Polynesians ended up in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and they came up with all kinds of outlandish theories to explain it. Maybe there used to be a landmass that they just walked across? Or maybe there used to be a huge continent here that just completely sunk into the ocean? Their biases wouldn't allow them to believe that maybe, just maybe, Polynesians got there through their own sailing abilities. As a matter of fact, the ancient Polynesians were master navigators. They used their observation of stars, ocean currents and wave patterns, the flight of birds, winds, and weather. And the incredible thing is that these wayfinding techniques and geographic knowledge were never written down. They were all passed down from generation to generation through the oral tradition. The channel Overly Sarcastic Productions has a great video about the history of Hawaii, and it covers this, so I'll link that below. Fun fact, many historians believe that Captain Cook would never have reached Australia if it wasn't for the Polynesian navigator Tupaia, who volunteered to join his expedition.
Yeah, you always make me feel like home, yeah, you never leave my thoughts alone, yeah, you're the reason I'm going out my mind, I just can't stop thinking about you.
After a few days in Ko'olina, we moved over to Waikiki. Alohilani Resort is a fantastic property in this area, and it's located right across the street from the beach. If you're interested in learning more about Alohilani, I'll link below to our in-depth review. One thing that makes Alohilani really special is that they offer a breadth of experiences that allow guests to gain a much deeper understanding of Hawaii's history and traditional cultural practices. The property is also very passionate about sustainability initiatives. If you stay at Alohilani, you'll notice that the resort adds a $5 tree fee to your bill. That's because the property has pledged to plant 100,000 trees in Hawaii, and those $5 go straight to this reforestation program. Alohilani even offers guests the opportunity to take part in their own tree planting ceremony. This was one of our favorite experiences during our time in Oahu. Gunstock Ranch is a working ranch located on the north shore of Oahu. We rode on horseback to the Hawaiian Legacy Forest, where Sean and Ella each got to plant their own tree. It was a beautiful ceremony. Our guides poured water on the newly planted tree from traditional Hawaiian ipus or gourd vessels, while the girls cupped the leaves in their hands and imparted their good wishes and positive energy for the baby tree. We dedicated one tree to their grandma and another to their grandpa. They couldn't join us on this trip, but it makes us happy to think that these trees will grow and flourish in Hawaii in their honor.
I just wanna be free, finally, finally.
to our new friends, Amanda and Felix. They have an amazing YouTube channel. It's called Amanda and Felix Eats, and it's all about good eats all around Oahu, all the good local spots. So today we are checking out a place called Highway Inn.
Highway Inn, they've been around since 1947. It's family owned and operated, and they're known for one of the best traditional Hawaiian foods on the island.
This meal was definitely a highlight of the trip for us, and Amanda and Felix ordered an incredible spread of traditional Hawaiian foods for us to try, like kiawe smoked meat, flame-broiled pulehu ribs, chicken long rice, which is similar to Chinese congee but made with vermicelli noodles instead of rice, lau lau, which is pork and butterfish steamed in lau lau leaves, traditionally cooked in an underground oven called an imu, lomi salmon, which is a sort of Hawaiian ceviche made up of diced tomatoes, onion, and salmon. And I absolutely love this trio of poke bowls, which included spicy ahi, shoyu sesame ahi, and my personal favorite, limu poke, which is a very simple preparation done with seaweed. Of course, we also had to try poi. This native Hawaiian dish is made up from mashed up taro root, which is then mixed with water to form a paste and then fermented. It comes in a variety of fermentation levels, from sweet to very sour, and it comes in a variety of consistencies, from very runny to very thick. It's one of those foods that's a bit of an acquired taste. People seem to either love it or hate it, so we had to try it for ourselves.
That's a pretty good sized bite.
Uh-oh.
Oh yeah.
If I'm gonna do it. It tastes like celery almost. Like it's not bad. It's just. I mean,
Like grassy?
Yeah, a little bit. It tastes like unsweetened yogurt.
Oh yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Ella, why are you making that face? You didn't even have any. What do you think? What does it taste like? No? Not a fan?
Like the most organic yogurt.
Yeah. Well, you dress appropriately. Just.
The history of colonization and immigration in Hawaii hasn't always been a happy one, but one thing it definitely brought was an explosive mix of cultural influences that makes Hawaiian cuisine incredibly dynamic. And if there's one dish that symbolizes the diversity of Hawaii's culinary heritage, it's the plate lunch. This is a casual meal that usually consists of white rice, macaroni salad, and one or more types of protein. The origins of the plate lunch date back to the 1880s, when immigrants from countries like Japan, China, the Philippines, Korea, and Portugal were working on Hawaii's pineapple and sugar plantations. Plantation workers would bring their lunches with them, which usually consisted of leftover meat from the previous night's dinner, with rice added to make it more filling. By the 1930s, food carts or trucks called lunch wagons started popping up to serve these plantation workers. The meals were often served on compartmentalized paper plates, which is where the term plate lunch comes from. By the 1950s, the Hawaiian plantations had pretty much collapsed since workers now had, rights. So plantation owners weren't making the same kinds of profits as they did in the good old days of indentured servitude. But one thing that remained from that era was the plate lunch. They were now readily available at restaurants and drive-ins, and today the plate lunch is still a staple of Hawaiian cuisine. We ate a ton of plate lunches while we were in Oahu. Some of our favorites were the teri beef and loco moco at Ted's Bakery, the chicken katsu and teri beef at Rainbow Drive-In, the shrimp scampi at Giovanni's Shrimp Truck, and the teri beef, chicken katsu, and char-broiled fish at Kahai Street Kitchen. Now, of course, we can't discuss Hawaiian cuisine without talking about shave ice. I asked Amanda and Felix what they thought the key elements were when it comes to making really good shave ice.
I think it's the quality of the ice. Like, I know that sounds weird because you think ice is just ice, but the places we like, they use a finer blade to shave down the ice, and it just makes the shave ice like very fine, very soft. It's almost velvety as it melts in your mouth, versus like as opposed to kind of like chunky ice, you know what I'm saying? Like crushed ice. So shaved as opposed to crushed ice. Of course, the homemade syrups, that's also a plus.
And the toppings.
Yeah, and the variety of toppings they offer too, that's what makes our favorite shaved ice spots.
One of the first shaved ice spots we tried was Matsumoto's on the North Shore. The syrups all had kind of a harsh medicinal taste, so even though this place is pretty famous, we didn't love it. One place we did love was Island Vintage Shave Ice in Waikiki. The flavors were great, and we loved their popping boba and mochi toppings. It's located right in the most touristy part of Waikiki, so the lines get long, but it's definitely worth the wait. Another place we really enjoyed was Waiola's Shave Ice in Honolulu. And Amanda and Felix took us to one of their favorite spots, Shimazu Shave Ice, which was fantastic. If you want even more great recommendations on what and where to eat when visiting Oahu, be sure to subscribe to Amanda and Felix's channel. I love that they're especially passionate about promoting locally owned and operated restaurants, which is more important now than ever before. I mentioned before that Alohilani has a range of cultural experiences for guests. Our family had the honor of participating in a traditional Hawaiian ocean blessing or ceremonial saltwater cleansing with Andrea Valenzona, who's the activities and cultural ambassador at Alohilani.
So for Hawaiians, this was something that was a part of their daily routine. If not daily, it would be whenever they felt it was necessary. A lot of people think when you do a hikuvai, it's because a lot of things are going wrong in your life. Not necessarily the truth. Sometimes some people just got to reconnect or reground themselves. Sometimes it's just a reflection of your life. You want to reflect back on maybe the things that you can disconnect with to allow other things to come in and connect with yourself. But the salt water itself in this ocean here, it's a very, when you have a connection with it, it can be very spiritual in that sense too. I always make the lei. My grandfather always told me when you do it like if it's your own. Do it like as if it's your child, your family. Remember, what you give them is what they're taking from you. Hawaiians and leis are very, very spiritual because why? As I make these leis, everything that I'm thinking here and here, I put into my lei because it serves its purpose for what we're going to do here today. And at least I know that this is my connection to you. It's kind of like my umbilical cord to you folks.
Andrea told us that while she's really passionate about sharing her Hawaiian culture with travelers, some Native Hawaiians she knows don't like the fact that she shares practices like these with visitors. The fact that Hawaiians have mixed feelings about sharing some of their cultural practices is certainly understandable. The development of the tourism industry in Hawaii has depended largely on marketing Hawaii as a tropical paradise of swaying palm trees, unspoiled beaches, and beautiful women. Much of Hawaiian culture has been packaged for consumption by tourists, and in some cases, it's been transformed to the point of having almost nothing to do with its original form. Take hula, for instance. The hula performances done at luau's for tourists have very little to do with the real dances might see at a professional hula competition. While hula has its roots in solemn religious ceremonies, the type of hula most tourists expect to see is more about beauty, grace, and a good amount of sex appeal. We took a hula dancing lesson with Andrea and learned a lot from her. Andrea retired about 7 years ago as a professional hula dancer, and her 5 daughters all compete and perform as well. She taught us that hula is a complex art form with many precise hand movements that communicate specific things, from the swaying of a tree in the breeze, or a wave in the ocean, to feelings like fondness or yearning. We also learned that hula was an important way for the ancient Polynesian people to impart knowledge.
So because Hawaiians didn't have a written language or any type of a record, their only form of documentation was the hula itself. Hula was the way that they carried on their genealogy. From their genealogy, it was their stories. They were able to keep track of the records of places that they traveled, people that they see, islands that they conquered, or basically their family's lineage.
Hula is much more than just a dance. Much of it is about understanding the deeper meaning behind a song.
What is the job of the hula dancer? To make you understand the music.
Andrea told us that in preparing for a competition, it's not uncommon for her daughter to spend months studying a song and its composer, visiting the places the composer frequented at the time they wrote the song, all before even starting to learn the dance itself. If you'd like to learn more about real hula, the channel Great Big Story has a great video that follows one dancer as she competes in the prestigious Merry Monarch hula competition. I'll link that below.
We were kids that didn't know, but we grew to solid gold. In the night, you and I, not long ago, laid in bed without our clothes, together keeping out the cold. In the night, you and I, not long ago, not long ago.
If you wander through the halls of Alohilani Resort, you'll come across this portrait of Queen Liliuokalani. There's an interesting reason behind why the property displays this portrait and why it's hung in this exact spot. As I learned when I took the Queen's Heritage Tour with Andrea, Queen Liliuokalani was the last monarch of Hawaii. Alohilani resides on land once occupied by the Queen, and its name comes from one of her beachside cottages. She was only able to rule for a few years before being overthrown in 1893 during a coup led by American sugar planters. Despite this, she's a towering figure in Hawaiian history. Hawaii was an independent, sovereign nation before it was illegally seized by the US and eventually annexed as a state. This is something a lot of history books gloss over. Not only was the Queen a gifted composer and writer, but she left almost all her estate to a trust to care for the most disadvantaged Native Hawaiian children and their families. To this day, the trust pays for social services for tens of thousands of Hawaiian kids. So why is the painting hung in this exact spot? Well, the Queen's favorite flower was the pua kalaunu, known as the crown flower. To the right of this painting is a door, and what's planted outside this door? You guessed it, pua kalaunu shrubs. So every day, Queen Liliuokalani can gaze upon her favorite flowers from this spot. It's just one of the ways the property honors her legacy. I think that when visiting a place like Hawaii, some travelers can exhibit a sense of entitlement. There's a feeling that because they spend a lot of money to come to Hawaii, they're entitled to gratitude. They're entitled to being treated with that famous aloha spirit. And they're entitled to consuming the culture here. I have a different take on it. Anytime we visit a place and a local takes the time out of their day to share a little bit of their culture with us, I see it as a gift. They're under no obligation to teach me anything. So when they do, I feel nothing but gratitude. Spending time with Andrea gave us so much insight into Hawaii's rich culture and history, and that truly was a gift. Since there are such mixed feelings towards tourism among locals, I was curious to get Amanda and Felix's take on the issue.
But I'd say majority of us are welcoming to tourism. Just like almost like everywhere else we come, just ask everyone to respect the land. Treat it like you're visiting someone's home. Just be respectful to the culture, the community.
One thing they mentioned that I thought was interesting is that there's often a split in opinions between those who live in town and those who live in more rural areas.
Me and him, we grew up in town.
Yeah.
His family in particular worked at the swap meet, which is heavily reliant on tourism. I grew up literally in Waikiki area, so tourism, I've known that my whole life. We're kind of not biased, but we're used to the tourism and we welcome it as long as everyone's very respectful.
Locals that live on the countryside want to preserve our ecosystem, and they blame tourism for destroying the ecosystem here. I mean, that's not necessarily true, but that's what they grew up believing.
One side effect of tourism in Hawaii is that people who visit Hawaii like it so much that they end up moving there, or at least buying real estate there. In some parts of Hawaii, billionaires like Oracle founder Larry Ellison and Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg are practically buying up entire islands. Activity like this has driven up the real estate prices in a huge way, so much so that today, Hawaii is the most expensive US state to live in. Not surprisingly, it also has one of the highest homelessness rates among US states. The national average has 17 in every 10,000 people experiencing homelessness. In Hawaii, that rate is 44.9 in every 10,000 people. Many Hawaiian residents have resigned themselves to the fact that they'll just never be able to afford to buy a home. And many have decided to just pack it up and move to the mainland instead, where life is cheaper.
You love me like the seasons change. You're harder than July. You're cold, you switch so fast. Love me like the seasons change. You're harder than July. You're cold, you switch so fast.
hiking the Diamond Head Crater is a must-do when in Oahu. This was actually the first time we've done a hike together as a family, and as you'll see, the girls absolutely loved it.
Hey, we made it to the top.
He had white powder all over in his nostrils.
Loving it.
Don't do that.
Why?
It's bad. It's soft and it's hot and there's stingers.
Listen, we're a bunch of city kids. I was born and raised in Hong Kong, Serge was born and raised here in New York City, and of course the girls are too. We're not outdoorsy at all, but we love to push out of our comfort zone when we travel. Not all of us will enjoy every activity, but it's important for us as parents to always encourage the girls to try new things. Luckily, there was a snack stand at the end of the trail, so the girls got to reward themselves with a Dole Whip and some shave ice after the hike. So the day still ended in smiles. There are many different hikes you can do in Oahu, ranging from easy ones like Diamond Head to extremely challenging multi-day hikes. But one thing you should always do is follow the rules and listen to safety advice from locals, because sometimes the most beautiful natural settings in Hawaii can also be the most deadly.
What happened recently was a tourist went hiking but disregarded everyone's simply. Everyone told them like, oh, it's rainy today, don't go hiking, don't go to the waterfall. Yeah, like don't. I think you guys should turn back. I think you guys shouldn't go today. But they disregarded everything, and then it ended up they got swept out and died. And then they're trying to sue, and then it's like,
Oh my gosh, really?
you know, like, oh, you guys should put more signs up. You guys should have people patrolling the area.
Unfortunately, situations like the one Amanda described are not uncommon. There have been many cases where tourists visited certain hiking trails or waterfalls around Hawaii without heeding safety warnings from locals. They got seriously hurt or died, and as a result, those sites got shut down completely so that even locals couldn't use them anymore. If you don't live in an area that's a popular destination for tourism, it can be hard to appreciate just how disruptive tourism can be to the lives of locals there. We live in New York City, for example, and there are entire neighborhoods that us locals will go out of our way to avoid, like Times Square. Another example is Dumbo. This is a residential neighborhood in Brooklyn, but over the years it's become a huge tourist attraction, in part because everyone's trying to snap this exact photo. On the weekends, people who live in Dumbo can't even enjoy their own neighborhood because the whole place is overrun by tourists. Now, does that mean we hate tourists in New York? Not at all. We love the fact that so many people around the world are drawn to this amazing city. And of course, tourism plays an important role in our city's economy. But just like Amanda and Felix demonstrate, you can appreciate the benefits of tourism to your hometown while also recognizing the ways in which it can detract from local quality of life.
So all you lucky ones, what up? You're always on the run, what up? I mean, don't get me wrong, but what up? Or was I not the one you dreamt of? No, no, no. 'Cause the life you live will never be enough.
The third resort we stayed at during this trip was the Ritz-Carlton Residence's Waikiki Beach. Though this property is located in Waikiki, it's tucked away from the hustle and bustle because it's located right by Luxury Row, which is basically Honolulu's version of Rodeo Drive. If you're interested in learning more about the Ritz-Carlton, I'll link below to our in-depth review.
When the time is right and I'm not alone, I will conquer this and bring you home. When this world has stopped and the breeze is served, when the time is right, I'll sing you a song. Hey, I'll sing you a song. Hey, I'll sing you a song.
One place you should definitely visit when traveling to Oahu is Ho'omaluhia Botanical Garden. Spread across 400 incredibly lush acres, you'll find plants from major tropical regions around the world, everywhere from the Philippines to Sri Lanka, from Polynesia to India. When we went, it had rained earlier in the day, and that gave the gardens a magical, foggy, dewy, dreamy feel. Unfortunately, we only had an hour or two here, but next time I would love to pack some picnic food and spend a full day. Before this trip, I had expected to visit Hawaii and find a place that was completely scrubbed of its heritage and transformed into nothing more than a playground for mainland tourists. Instead, what I found were people who are passionate about preserving traditional knowledge and techniques. people who work hard to support locally owned businesses, and people who are dedicated to sharing cultural practices and traditional art forms with the world. So yes, I was very wrong about Hawaii. I can't wait to go back.